I'm happy to share this joint work with Max Chen at Cornell University on student engagement in mobile learning via text message. This work really is inspired by the increasing uptake in mobile learning around the world and the relative lack of understanding of what it looks like for students to be engaging in mobile learning at scale. There's a lot of case studies, there's a lot of qualitative studies, but there's a lot fewer studies that look at a large number of learners and understand their behavior as they engage in mobile learning in a specific context. And so that's what we're trying to achieve here. The context we're looking at is Sub-Saharan Africa, which has very low educational attainment rates, and it also has a lot of challenges. It has the lowest rate of access in the world. Many kids are not in school. It also has problems with shortages of teachers, overcrowded classrooms, and very limited access to resources and physical school buildings. So it's an environment where mobile learning can in principle make a big difference. We're also seeing the technological tide change in favor of mobile learning. Smartphone prices are falling and mobile adoption is increasing in that area dramatically over the last few years and projected to increase further. And that has changed already financial transactions, weather information, health information, as well as education. And so we're looking particularly at mobile learning in Africa, which has been ongoing since the early 2000s. So it's not a new development, but whereas it used to be targeted at middle-aged full-time workers who owned devices at the time, more and more we're seeing a move towards targeting students, targeting teachers and parents as well. And so here are the research questions that we're interested in answering in this space. First of all, how do students engage with mobile learning over the course of time? And we're looking at a full calendar year in this context. Second, how does their engagement with mobile learning vary by their grade level? So are students in lower grades in school behaving differently than students who are at the end of high school, for instance? How does engagement vary between more and less active students on the platform? Can we understand engagement types in this environment like we did previously in massive open online courses? And finally, how much do students learn using mobile learning in this context? Do we see evidence of learning in this environment? So we're going to look at Shupavu 291 in this context. Shupavu 291 is a mobile learning app that has been used in Kenya, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire. It's founded by a group of teachers who are very motivated to bring students an educational technology that will help them learn in these countries and help them give them more access to learning materials. In 2019, 5 million users have used Shupavu 291, including some teachers and parents as well. The course content, this is very important, is aligned with the national curriculum in Kenya. So these are teachers creating course content in alignment with what should be taught for a given subject in a given grade level in the country, right? So this is not just any content. The way it works for students is that students choose a grade that they're in and the subject that they want to study. They then read a brief tutorial on that knowledge component or that skill that they're trying to learn. And then they're given a quiz. And the quiz has usually 5 questions in it, and they get immediate feedback. So this is what it might look like. You get a text message with a question. You can reply to the question with a letter. Some of them are also open response. And you get immediate feedback on whether you get it right or wrong. And if you get it incorrectly, you also often get some clarification of why that was incorrect. Right? So the data set that we're looking at here is one of the students in Kenya in 3 specific grade levels, grade 6, 9, and 12 in the year 2018. That encompasses 28 million platform actions and 1.5 million quiz attempts. So it's a pretty large corpus of data, one of the largest that I've certainly seen in this domain. We exclude those students who've been very inactive. They've signed up but never touched any quizzes in the first 14 days, which narrows down our focal sample to 77,000 students. And so for those students, we begin by answering our first research question, which is, how do students engage with mobile learning over time? And to do so, we plot engagement in terms of how many quizzes on average students attempt on a weekly basis over time. So we see this for grades 6, 9, and 12. We normalize because students in grades 12 were generally more active, but as a normalized plot, we see this pattern, which has these clear cyclical trends. And at first we weren't quite sure what those spikes were related to. And then we overlaid the official school schedule and saw that they very much align with school holidays. And so in Kenya, you've got half-term holidays and full-term holidays. And that is when we see clear spikes in student engagement with the platform. There's a second spike, which is leading up to December, where students are, some of those grade levels have exams. So grade 12 has a big exam at the end of secondary school, and grade 6 is preparing for an exam at the end of their primary school time. And so we see students engaging more in advance of those exams, and that then drops off pretty quickly. So we see that there is this alignment here. Now, the second research question is, how do students engage with mobile learning over time at the individual level? So we saw that overall, we see these activity trends. But if we look at individuals, what happens to them from the day that they sign up and over the next 10 days that they're on the platform? And what we see here is a high rate of attrition. Looks reminiscent to some of the plots in massive open online courses. You know, students sign up and there's quick disengagement among students. Now, we wanted to compare this by grade level. And you've already seen in the two plots before that there's strong alignment in overall engagement with the platform between grades 6, 9, and 12. We also look at this at the fine-grained level of clickstream interactions. And so here you see a few different clickstream events that students can engage in: navigation, quizzes, registration, looking at lessons, using other platform features. And across these three grades, you really don't see much variation. Students are engaging in very similar ways on this platform, no matter if they are primary school students or high school students. And that holds true in a number of different ways. We've tried to look at this. This is just one of the ways to try and tease this apart. How engagement varies between more and less active students was the next question we were interested in, especially after seeing that there wasn't much variation across grade levels. And to do so, we wanted to find different behavioral patterns. And we use k-means longitudinal clustering. That means for each student, we look at how much time they spent on day 0, on day 1, and so forth until day 9. And we cluster this engagement pattern over time. We find that 3 clusters is a good solution, although the results don't really change if you go up to 4 or drop down to 2. In general, we've got 3 activity clusters here, with the least active cluster being the largest and the most active cluster being the smallest by far. And not too surprisingly, this is what these activity clusters look like, right? The high activity cluster does indeed stay active for a much more sustained period after enrolling, whereas the other 2 drop off very quickly. Once we have these clusters defined, we can now look more deeply at how students are engaging on the platform more broadly. And so here we're looking at 6 different metrics of interest for how students behave on the platform. And I want to point out specifically how high activity students are behaving. You can see over on the course accessed that high activity students tend to explore courses, and then they find one course that they keep working on over time. You also see that they attempt around 5 quizzes per day. Right? This is in on the left side in the middle, and they do that pretty consistently. And we see at the bottom left that there is an improvement in accuracy over time, over that 10-week period, where they get about sort of under 60% right, and then they move up to 62%. 60%, by the way, is the usual passing threshold on this platform. And so that last result was most striking to us, that seems to be this improvement in accuracy over time. And we wondered, is this evidence of learning? And to answer that question more thoroughly, we conducted a learning curve analysis. A learning curve analysis looks at one knowledge component, one skill, and tracks how students do over time on that skill. Right? And if you see a pattern like this, where the rate of answering incorrectly questions related to a given knowledge component drops with practice, we take that as evidence of learning gains in the environment. And so we tried to apply this to our context and found it somewhat challenging. But here's our first attempt, which we call the absolute method. We identified 4 different knowledge components that seem promising. They're still more broadly defined than usual in the space, but the closer that we could get to something that was clearly defined. We found 3 quizzes, each with 5 questions that were taken by many students. In fact, there were 1,300 of those students. And we plotted their rate of answering incorrectly over time. And here you see the 4 different knowledge components that we chose: body systems, fractions, numbers, and the covenant. And you don't see any real downward sloping pattern like in the stylized example I showed you before. So we thought maybe it's because students, unlike in an intelligent tutoring system, have a lot more agency here. Right? They can move around and take quizzes in any order. And so what we tried instead is a relative approach, where for the same knowledge components I showed you just now, we instead look at what questions did students answer in whatever order they answered them in. Right? So each student has a different order, different kinds of questions for the same knowledge component. And we just look at the first 20 that they've answered, which gives us more students to look at here in the sample, because it doesn't restrict them to take them all in the same order. But unfortunately, we still don't see a better learning curve here. Again, no real evidence of a downward trend. We tried a few other checks here to try and explain this, but we weren't really able to find strong evidence of a downward sloping incorrectness rate, no matter what we tried here. So with that, let me wrap up. This is some large-scale evidence that we contribute on how students use mobile learning in context. It helps us understand how they're using it, under what conditions they're using it. In particular, realizing that it is very much tied to school and exam schedules. It is complementing formal education in this context, which suggests that it is accessible to students. It only requires a basic phone, and it suggests that it can serve as a potential alternative during disruption, like COVID-19 or civil unrest. In fact, Max and I, together with our collaborators at CMU, are looking at a study of how civil unrest in Kenya manifested in students' usage of mobile learning during that time. We also see that short-term practice is most common, students signing up for a day or two and doing some exercises. Only 2.3% were highly active students. But for those 2.3, it might have been a very affordable way for tutoring. After-school tutoring, cram schools, as they're called, are very common in Kenya and other parts of Sub-Saharan Africa. And many families cannot afford it. And so this might be a low-cost version to achieve this. For now, at least, we find limited evidence of learning in this context with the methods we applied, but there's certainly room for trying different ways of eliciting learning gains in this environment. Overall, we put out a call for more quantitative as well as qualitative analysis of mobile learning at scale to better understand how this new modality can serve students in usual school times, but also especially at times of disruption that may be planned, like the summer melt during the summer, or unplanned disruptions such as during pandemics or other forms of civil unrest, teacher strikes as well. With that, I'd like to thank you, shout out to Max Chen, and take your questions if there's time.